Thank you all very much for joining today, and many thanks to Orbus for inviting me to present. We have about 45 minutes together. I plan on spending about 20 to 25 minutes making remarks on the topic at hand, and then we'll open it up for some question and answer. I hope you find the presentation provocative, and so we'll not be shy of asking questions at the end. My name is Sanjiv Nathani, and I am the Chief Business Officer at Cambridge Technology, a fast-growing firm focused on operationalizing AI for enterprise clients. I have been fortunate in my career to have been part of many transformations in largely financial services. And through them all, I've developed a great fascination for the topic of design. I've even managed an enterprise architecture function briefly and developed great respect for the incredible skill and acumen of architects. So I've wondered often recently, what role should enterprise architects play today in a world that feels like it's gone just slightly mad? Let's dive in. We sure live in unusual times. I can't see you, but I assume you're all nodding your heads or rolling your eyes. There's the pandemic, of course. Are we in a COVID surge? Just coming out of it? Headed to another one? It's hard to tell, really. I suppose it depends on where you are. And what does it all mean for our professional lives? Then there's the virtualized work. I remember that period in 2020 when we went into our first lockdown. One day we were in the client office. I was at Deloitte then. And the next day we were all remote. Poof. And I don't think we missed a beat. The client work went on as if nothing had happened, except everyone was suddenly on Zoom. I'm assuming most of you would say you observed the same at your firms. Almost instantly, we all doubled and tripled down on digitizing our businesses. We realized that if we couldn't reach our clients online, we might not reach them at all. In banking, budgets for digitizing almost tripled in 2021. And probably enabled by all this digitization, we are now seeing an explosion of AI. It was lurking in the shadows, you might say, but now it's roaming free. I could go on, but I'm sure you agree we live in unusual times. So, what does all this mean for us as professionals? To call out the elephant in the room, we are massively rethinking client experience, not just because we are digitizing everything, but because client needs and behaviors have changed, very likely permanently. Similarly, we are rethinking the way we work. For one, the horse has very definitely left the barn, if you will, on virtualizing work. As organizational leaders, we can't question its feasibility anymore. And there's more. Many and perhaps most professionals are going through a bit of an existential crisis and completely rethinking work-life balance. Welcome to the Great Resignation. I'm sure you're reading all about it. In the meanwhile, though, fintech, insurtech, health tech, X-tech, and so on have all continued their disruptive march. So for most firms, it's turned into a matter of acquire, adapt, or risk obsolescence. Responding to that threat is an imperative, now more than ever. And of course, risk, regulatory pressures, resiliency still rule the day. I'm sure you'll agree it's all a bit of a pile-on. Stating the not so obvious then, but with deep implications for enterprise architecture. Sure feels like everyone is transforming everything all the time. Can you ever achieve a target state design with all this relentless change? Feels kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. By the time you finish painting, it's time to repaint it again. For that matter, is it even possible to design a credible target state, given all the transformation programs that are layering one on top of another? It sure feels like the goalposts keep moving all the time. And with this incredible pace of digitization and automation, can the business still articulate the rationale for all this transformation? Or is that all just lost in all the layers of change? At the same time, transformations are getting so large and complex that by the time the original business intention is achieved, the business needs have changed. And now the transformation needs a transformation. I've been there, and so have you, I'm sure. Feels like we are trying to build skyscrapers with sifting sand sometimes, doesn't it? In strategy terms, Rita McGrath, a friend and ex-colleague, would say that the notion of being able to create and sustain competitive advantage is frankly a bit archaic in this day and age. There's really no point setting a 5-year strategy and building a defensive moat around that strategy, because the world changes so fast that in a year or two, you probably need to reset the strategy and build a different moat. Even 3-year roadmaps, in my mind, are a bit suspect. As design and strategy professionals, I don't think we can really do our jobs without developing roadmaps. But truly, that 3rd year is a bit suspect because the assumptions behind the roadmap have likely changed by year 2. What can we do, though? What can we do other than to chase and exploit market trends? That's what remains. A bit like surfing, I guess. If we can catch that wave before it breaks, we can create and capture enormous value for our firms. Instead, as firms exploit market trends well know, it's all about being able to reassemble yourself quickly to exploit the trends, or for that matter, respond to natural disasters. So it has become a game of having capabilities that are modular and capable of being reassembled into many different shapes and forms quickly. Thank God I spent so much time with Lego as a kid. In other words, it becomes a game of agility today. The biggest hurdle to agility is our cost of change. All that scale and complexity, even without the legacy, comes with an enormous cost of change. We are getting more automated, but we are also getting more rigid as a result. This is an interesting one. I've led analysis that shows how, as firms digitize and automate, their labor force spend increasingly more time in requirements, testing, and control than in actual transaction processing. That may be counterintuitive, but it is true. Similarly, when we measure the opportunity, or the opportunity cost rather, to firms of having to turn down product, client, market opportunities because it simply isn't possible to respond fast enough, it far exceeds the cost of current operations. In other words, it pays far more to be nimble than to be cost efficient these days. Clearly, you should do both if you can, but nimble is starting to become more critical. And perhaps not so obvious corollary to that point is that being able to respond quickly and well becomes far more important sometimes than being thoroughly planned. As difficult as it is for those of us in the strategy, planning, and design profession, a good decision sometimes isn't made with everything thought through to 100%. To summarize, though, using a famous line from Top Gun, we have the need for speed. I can't wait to see the sequel. With all that need to react and respond well, we might say that agility actually becomes all about adaptability. We see already that engineering flexibility into a platform is actually becoming more critical in some ways than engineering scalability. For example, we are increasingly in a game of microservices and workflow orchestration in our platforms, and not factory systems. Similarly, design tools and model-driven development are enabling simulation and what-if analysis to de-risk development and minimize the scope of user acceptance testing. With artificial intelligence and machine learning especially, modeling, predicting, and testing iteratively is becoming a way of reducing the reliance on designing and controlling. With fast AI and ML-driven feedback loops, for example, in the world of digital twins, which are starting to surface for all industries, the question is quickly becoming, how do we move at the speed of human decisions? In all of this, though, it's becoming increasingly more important to know how everything in your complex business platforms interconnect, how people, process, technology, and data interconnect and are interdependent. That knowledge is critical to keeping all our very many transformation efforts harmonized and not inadvertently canceling each other out. It's about avoiding the collisions. That knowledge is also critical to ensure that all our well-meaning changes don't set off a chain reaction of unintended consequences. That knowledge is at the heart of ensuring control and resiliency in our business platforms. In fact, as a response to impending operational resiliency regulations in EMEA, and soon in the US, firms are looking at enterprise architecture tools to help them evidence operational resiliency. In other words, truly, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a model is worth 1,000,000. So you might ask, what happens to enterprise architects in this brave new world? I think they become even more critical to the enterprise, but in a different way than before. They become much more part of the business as usual than just the voice of long-range transformation. I see them becoming less called on as historians of the enterprise who can peer through the thick clouds of change to see the optimal future state, and more the voice of feasibility and efficiency in the sprints required to capitalize on market trends. I see them less focused on design curation and end-state design definition, and much more on what-if analysis and simulation to find optimal paths for market share sprints. I also see them as more focused on the business as a whole and not just a technology platform. After all, isn't a fully digitized business really just a tech business? And let's remember, a growth mindset is really a design mindset. We can solve the problems and jump the hurdles if we design creatively. So to wrap up then, onto a lighter topic, neuroscience. Just checking to see if you're still with me. But recent advances in neuroscience tell us that human intelligence is really based on our ability to model the world we interact with, predict its behavior, and then test to see if the predictions hold. Or if they don't, then to improve the mental model. And human decisions are really based on our internal voting for mental models that show the best match between prediction and testing. In turn, organizational priorities are set based on those who construct the best narratives, the best stories, to gain the maximum votes for their mental models. And organizational decisions are about finding mental models that achieve consensus. So if it's really all about modeling after all, aren't enterprise architects the best positioned to help drive enterprise decision-making and prioritization? And doesn't that sound like a wonderful, elevated place for our profession to be in? With that, I'm going to turn it over to the audience for some Q&A. Thank you so very much for your time and attention. Jenna?
Thank you, Sanjiv, for today's session. It was really interesting. Yes, please, everyone, submit your questions via GoToWebinar now. Also, as a reminder, this session is being recorded, so will be shared to everybody after we've closed today. Okay, so I think we're starting to get a few questions coming in. The first one, Sanjiv, is, do enterprise architects have a role beyond the CIO organization?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I think the short answer is yes, very much so. If anything, much more so than previously. I go back to my point that as businesses digitize, frankly, the entire business is technology. It is encapsulated in technology. And to really understand what is going on in the business, how it's performing, what are its dynamics, how does it need to shift to capture market trends, as I pointed out. It's a game of really understanding how all the moving parts come together and need to be coordinated in order to drive the outcome. Well, that's design and that's enterprise architecture. So I'd like to think that increasingly enterprise architects have a bigger voice and a bigger role in the business in a way that certainly preserves their criticality to the CIO organization, but makes them much more vital to the business at large. So yes, indeed, Jenna.
Great, and we've just had another one come in. How do EAs best engage with the business?
Well, I think as I hopefully you caught my drift in the presentation, the level of change that's happening in any organization today, in any firm, is extraordinary. You could argue it's continuous transformation, that you're continuously morphing. If that's the case, then you are an incredible resource to the business to understand what's possible, what's feasible, what's optimal, where the barriers are, what the challenges are, to help with trade-off discussions. So, I would imagine if you're not already being pulled into those discussions, you should and you will. because you hopefully have the best seat in the house to understand how the hip bone connects to the leg bone.
Thanks very much for that. Just another question here. If transformation is happening as quickly as you say, how do you create a trustworthy repository of design?
That's a great question, and this one, you'll find me more provocative than most. If trustworthy means stable, unshakable, unchangeable, and sort of a North Star that you can drive to relentlessly over many months and many years, then I think we're all going to be challenged because the world just isn't that stable anymore and moves too fast. But trust can be built at multiple levels. I think that building trust that there is a central repository is incredibly valuable because today it's not clear in my mind, talking to senior leaders, that they understand exactly where to go. They want to understand fully how the organization is constructed and can be moved and changed and morphed. So that's that level of trust. The other is increasingly, and I've seen this done at some firms, it's a matter of establishing confidence levels or intervals. So, having a perfect end state may be difficult with all this change, but, providing scenarios and providing some level of confidence in the ability to drive to those scenarios and making that transparent and allowing for choice and informed decision to be made is the game at hand. I've seen some firms actually try to gamify this. So, actually, providing future state scenarios with different confidence, levels and intervals, and basically using that as a trade-off, to drive a trade-off discussion for prioritization. So I think that's really where you might evolve to. In all of that, though, you do engender trust because you become a resource where people can go to get the information they need to drive those decisions, even if it's not a perfect end state.
Okay, this is quite a long one. So next question is, how do you balance your thoughtful need for controlled governance of architecture with the need for continuous transformation without eroding trust? I.e., how do you go from rigid documentation and traceability of decisions across multiple layers of meetings and principles that you once put in place to being the voice that says, just do it?
Right. And there, you might have actually captured the forever tension for all enterprise architects. You never feel like you have the luxury to describe the end state that you need to, where everything is perfectly controlled. You're constantly being asked to unanchor and move to the next goalpost. I believe that in a world where you're engineering in flexibility and you're engineering in adaptability, part of that is actually being able to create end states that are achievable rapidly, and also with controls. So in a world of microservices and workflow orchestration over factory systems, arguably you can reconfigure yourself very, very rapidly in a way that interim state is controlled. The fact that it's interim and the next bit of transformation is right ahead of you and you have to move pretty much as soon as you've achieved that interim state doesn't mean that interim state wasn't controlled. So it's thinking in smaller quanta and shorter time horizons and working with structures and designs that emphasize flexibility, but control within that flexibility for whatever duration there is stability.
Great. Thank you so much, Sanjiv. That looks like those are all the questions we have for today. So thank you again for hosting such an interesting webinar. And thank you for everybody who asked questions as well. And all that's left to be said is I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jenna. It's a real pleasure. Stay safe and well, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.